Can you hear me? Testing, testing. So I'm in Illuminate, but I know we have issues with the Illuminate recordings. So I'm going to go ahead and record this Illuminate session through screencast. So hopefully that will all work out and you'll be able to see and hear everything I'm doing. So I'm starting with the diverse array FRQ. And I'm just doing part 1 right now. So in that FRQ, they tell us that we're going to have 3 methods that are going to deal with arrays. And so, and they break it out into 3 parts. So I'm going to talk about part A. Now, in the past, what we would have done, because we have not talked about static yet, so I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And the directions tell you you are creating a static method. And if you look at the method header that they give you for the first array sum method, you'll notice it has the word static in it. So I'll explain that in a minute. Without static, which is how we've been operating, static may have been referenced in one of the other chapters briefly, but we haven't done a lot with it other than to create constants, which are things like pi, which is going to hold a specific value. Well, we can also do static methods. Now, up until this point, if we wanted to do something similar to what they're asking you to do, we would have a class called diverse array. We would have an instance variable, right, to hold the array. And then we would have a constructor where we initialize the instance variable by passing in a parameter, perhaps, with the array values. I didn't compile this because my NetBeans was giving me too many issues, but this is basically the idea, even if I have a couple minor typos. So we would take the constructor, we would initialize the array, that's the instance variable, and then we would sum it up simply by writing either a regular old-fashioned for loop or an enhanced for loop, and we would sum this up, and then we would return the sum back. And so in main, here's what we'd have to do. One way or another, whether we hard-coded the values in the array or we got the values from a loop, maybe with user input, we would get values into an array. And the way we've been doing it, we'd have to create an object, in this case named 1, of type diverse array. We'd have to pass through the constructor the array, and then we would call using the object name dot method name. We would call the method array sum, and we would print out the results. Then we would, if we wanted to sum up the values in a second array, again we'd get the values into the array somehow. Then we'd have to create a second object of type diverse array. We'd have to pass into the constructor that array, and then we would have to use the object name dot method name in the print line. And so if we had 10 or 15 different arrays and all we wanted to do was get the sums and check the sums of these various arrays, we'd have to create 10 or 15 objects to do that. So that's how we've operated in the past. But what if we just wanted a program where I could create an array, maybe get some values through a loop from the user, sum it up, then maybe I could give the user the chance to enter some new values in a new array and sum them up, and I could let them do that as much as they wanted, and I didn't have to go to all the overhead for every array of creating an object and calling the method. What if I wanted something similar to the math class, where with math we can just say math.abs and get the absolute value, math.sqrt and get the square root. And we don't have to go to the overhead of passing or creating these objects every time. Well, that is what static gives us the ability to do. So here, these are instance methods because they work with instance variables in the class. Notice they do not have the word static in them. So they can only be called by using object name dot method name. So an object has to be created or instantiated to use this instant method, which uses an instance variable in the class. Now when we get to static, which is what they've asked us to do, and notice they gave you this line right here. Public static is the new word. We'll stick in between public and the data type, the return type. So public static int array sum, and there's the parameter we're passing in. Now there's really no difference in the code. Okay, there's no difference in the code really from what I did above. The only difference is the keyword static appears here in the method header or signature. And we can have public static void methods, just like main is a public static void method, right? Because there's no object created of type main. So to allow us to run main without it somehow having to be created or referenced through an object, it is static. That's why the word static is there for main. So if I put the word static in here, what I'm saying is static methods belong to the class, not to an instantiated object. Static methods don't belong to objects of the class. They belong to the class itself. Meaning I don't have to go through the whole call a constructor, pass something in, give a value to an instance variable, then call the method. I can call the method without doing any of that. Now, by definition, static methods will not use any instance variables. They will never use an instance variable. They will take their input generally through a parameter. They will manipulate the parameter that is passed in, and then they will return some result. So when you see a question like this dealing with static, understand it's not going to use an instance variable because it doesn't belong to an instance or an instantiated object of the class. It belongs to the class itself. It will not use an instance variable. And as we see here, the array is passed in as a parameter. Something is done with the array. The result is returned back. There's no need for any instance variables in the static method. So in your class file, you would basically not have to worry about a constructor or an instance variable. You would just put the method in here just like this, okay? And so here, what does that do for us? Well, in main, if I have 3 different arrays and I want to sum them up, I can just do it this way. I can use the class name diverseArray dot method name, and I can pass the parameter, the different arrays in, and I can either print my answers out, I can store my answer in a variable and then do something with it like print it out. But notice I'm not having to go to the overhead of creating a diverse array object, using a constructor, then calling a method. I can directly call the class name dot method name, pass the parameter, and get my result back. So if I had a situation where I had 20 arrays, I don't want to have to create 20 diverse array objects just to sum them up. So again, if you think about the math class, right, that's what it does. You don't want to have to create a math object every time you want to do a square root. You just want to be able to say math.sqrt, and if the person wants to do 100 different square roots through a loop where they're entering them and testing themselves, and then they just, hit exclamation point to exit or something, you can do it like that. This is the same idea with what's going on here. In theory, you could have a loop where the person enters all the values for an array, gets the sum, then maybe, okay, I want to do it again. Yes, they enter a bunch more values into an array, you sum them up. Maybe they're summing up grades, maybe they're summing up points. And the easiest way to do it from our standpoint is to put it into an array, pass it to the static class, give them the answer back, let them move on, do the next set of numbers. They're not even aware necessarily that it's an array. To them, they're just entering a set or collection of numbers and they're getting a sum back. So this static allows us to do this with less code, less overhead. We don't have to worry about the whole traditional way we've been programming. And that's what they're asking for, which is why if you're kind of thinking, well, where's the instance variable? Static methods do not use instance variables. They generally take a parameter, do something, send a result back. Always remember the math class is static. And this is what static looks like when you code static. Same type of concept. So really the summing up is no big deal. And really static is no big deal, except that you haven't really been introduced to the concept. Now that you get the concept, really there's no difference in what you would do in this particular method. The difference is that you understand that there would not be an instance variable involved, and that it gives you the ability to do much quicker coding here. So I just wanted to point that out. Don't get alarmed about static. It's really just a way to give you a method that belongs to the class and not to instantiated objects of the class. And so we're going to say this is a static method. In our traditional coding, if we were doing it the old way that we've been doing everything, where we were not using static, we would call that an instance method. So this is an instance method. It does not have the word static in it. It must be used with an instance variable generally, and it will be used with object name.method name. This is a static method. It will not reference an instance variable, and it will be used with class name.method name, for example. So hopefully that helps you to see that the first question, part A, is really not that complex. Once you understand static, you know that the code is basically the same to cycle through the array and add it up. They're just, if you tried to put an instance variable in there, you tried to put something in there referencing an instance variable, they would take points off because static methods do not use instance variables. So hopefully that helps you, and that will help you realize that parts B and C are really not that different. It's just the idea that the static method goes with the class, and that's the key.